Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. We are going to be focusing in large part today on Taylor Swift The Eras Tour, which was easily the #1 movie at the box office, as everybody knew that it would be. What people didn't know is just how much money it would make. The pre-sales were reportedly very high. How would that balance out versus other ticket sales? The answer ended up being that it wasn't quite a record-breaking performance. It fell a few $1,000,000 short of that, but it still opened to over $90 million, and we'll look at that opening versus other concert films versus other record holders in the month of October. And let's really just get right into that box office top 10. The #1 movie, as I mentioned, Taylor Swift The Eras Tour. The final number, and this kept fluctuating over the weekend because nobody really knew how many people were going to show up from day to day, was $92.8 million, an easy #1 victory for Taylor Swift and that concert film. The Exorcist Believer in its second week comes in second place with $10.9 million and a drop of 58.6%. And honestly, I said it before, anything less than 60% for a horror movie as far as a week 1 to week 2 drop is a win. And especially when you weigh in the fact that The Exorcist Believer had terrible reviews, did not have a great cinema score, had a massive amount of competition with Taylor Swift. For it still to only drop 58.6% in the horror genre, that's not too bad of a performance in week number 2. In third place is Paw Patrol: The Mighty Movie. It drops 39.2% for a $6.8 million weekend total. It's getting close to $50 million domestically. Saw X is in fourth place with $5.6 million, followed by The Creator with $4.3 million. Its box office total is now just over $30 million domestically. The Blind is just out of the top 5 with $1.95 million and a $13.9 million domestic total. This is one of those movies, it hit sort of a specialty market and it's doing quite well. A Haunting in Venice was only about $3,000 behind The Blind to come in 7th place. It's now close to $40 million domestic, but still that first Murder on the Orient Express Poirot movie is something that these other two films have not been able to replicate as far as success goes. The Nun 2 is in 8th place at $1.6 million and a domestic total right around $83.7 million. The Equalizer 3 actually holds in 9th place from last weekend at just under $1 million. Its domestic total is now over $90 million. And Dumb Money drops 57.6% to come in 10th place at just over $900,000 and a disappointing domestic total of $12.6 million. Only one movie dropped out of the top 10 was displaced by Taylor Swift this weekend, and that is the re-release of Hocus Pocus, which spends just 1 week in the top 10. That's not unusual for movie re-releases. They tend to be a bit weighted toward that opening weekend. Looking at the most theaters lost for the weekend of October the 13th, for the second week in a row, Expendables 4, or Expendables, is the leader in this category. It dropped 735 more theaters. It's now just barely playing in wide release at 1,083 theaters. Of the 3 major new releases that came out 2 weeks ago, The Creator is the one that gets the most theaters dropped. 720 theaters dropped. It's now in 2,960 theaters. They will stock what people are going to see, and people just aren't going to see The Creator. Dumb Money is in 3rd place. It dropped 561 theaters for a total remaining theater count of just over 2,200. The Nun 2 has begun dropping theaters, 364 theaters down. It's now playing in 2,128 theaters. And then rounding out the 5 movies that lost the most theaters is When Evil Lurks. It was already in specialty release and it dropped about half of its theaters, 329 of them. It's still in 330 theaters. This movie will also be on Shudder very soon. Looking at what I call the box office road to recovery, the red line is the box office weekend average for 2021 to 2022. The blue line is the box office weekend average for 2015 through 2019, the 5 years preceding the pandemic. And you can see that we are once again above not only the average performance from 2021 and 2022, but also the average weekend performance for the 5 years that preceded the closure of theaters in 2020. And you can thank Taylor Swift for that. Just barely over that average performance, that blue line there. The top grosser for those 5 years, 2015 through 2019, was the second weekend of Joker. The top grosser for the last few years was the release of No Time to Die back in 2021. It's been 2 years since that movie came out. Stepping outside of the domestic market, let's look at the top 5 films everywhere except the United States and Canada. And the number 1 film internationally was still Taylor Swift: The Eras Tour, which brings in another $32 million. Paw Patrol: The Mighty Movie is expanding into more territories, and it comes in second place at $24.5 million. The Exorcist Believer goes down to third place at $15.8 million. Then we have 2 films from China, Under the Light at $13.4 million, and Volunteers to the War at $9.5 million. When you take those international grosses, you combine them with the domestic grosses, we get the top 5 films of the weekend worldwide. And of course, Taylor Swift being number 1 domestically and internationally means that the film is number 1 worldwide at $124.8 million. Paw Patrol: The Mighty Movie has a 23.9% increase from last weekend at $31.3 million worldwide. The Exorcist Believer also didn't have a bad drop-off worldwide, 39.5% for a $26.8 million total. Under the Light drops 22.4% from last weekend for $13.4 million. And The Creator rounds out the worldwide top 5 with a 40% drop from last weekend and a $10.2 million total. So let's talk a little bit about Taylor Swift: The Eras Tour. It did not get that $100 million weekend that everybody was talking about. I talked about it a lot here on this show because the thought was that it was very possible, some said probable, that it was going to eclipse that mark because of the strong pre-sales on the movie. Now, the big question mark was how much of the movie's performance would be those early pre-sales, the people that rushed out to buy tickets as soon as they were available, and how many people would be buying tickets later. And as it turned out, there were more people that pre-bought tickets and fewer people that showed up over the weekend, basically day of purchases, than anticipated, which is why the movie did not get over that $100 million barrier. So the expectation of the $100 million plus weekend was largely driven by analysts like myself and the media as well that was hyping this up, but it wasn't really something that was guaranteed. And I've seen a lot of spin on this performance to say like, well, it didn't even make $100 million. It's such a disappointing performance. That is absolute garbage. This was not a disappointing performance for this movie in any way, shape, or form. Now, if it had opened to $40 million and people thought it was going to open to 100, then yeah, sure, I could see that argument being made, but it fell short by about $8 million of 100 million. That's not so bad. It fell a few $1,000,000 short of breaking the all-time October record. That's not so bad. And it was a movie that cost reportedly $20 to $30 million to produce. There was very little marketing, reportedly only about $5 million because so much of it was just word of mouth. It's making money for AMC, which distributed the film. It's making money for the other theaters that showed the film. It's making money for Taylor Swift. So on a monetary scale, this is already a successful film and it will continue to play for the next weekend or two. We'll see how long the run goes. And when you get down to it, a hit movie is a hit movie. The other discussion is just about the degrees to which it is a hit. So let's see where it stands in a few of the various places in the record book. Looking first of all at the all-time October opening weekend. This was a record that many thought the movie was going to break if it had made that $100 million plus opening weekend. And it ends up falling about $3.4 million short. Joker still has the overall October opening weekend record domestically at $96.2 million. Taylor Swift: The Eras Tour is now in second place at $92.8 million, followed by Venom: Let There Be Carnage at $90 million, the first Venom movie at $80.2 million, and then 2018's Halloween at $76.2 million. If you were to adjust for inflation, it would actually still be these same 5 movies, just in a slightly different order. Also looking at the grosses for concert or live musical performance films, these are not opening weekend grosses. These are final domestic grosses. So after just 3 days, Taylor Swift has the domestic record for the highest grossing concert or live musical performance film. That number, of course, will only go up. She's already out-earned Justin Bieber's Never Say Never, which already had that domestic gross record. Michael Jackson's This Is It is in third place. Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus, The Best of Both Worlds concert, is in fourth place. And then Woodstock, which I actually did not have this number the last time I looked at this particular chart. The docufilm Woodstock reportedly had about a $34.5 million gross. Of course, if you were to adjust that for inflation, it would be a massive gross. But right now, unadjusted, it comes in fifth place. And it's not just concert films where Taylor Swift holds the record. She also now has the highest opening ever for a non-narrative movie. And when I say non-narrative, I mean one that does not have a screenplay. It's not written. It's a concert film. It's a documentary. Or as you can see from the number 2 film, it's a bunch of idiots hitting each other in the balls, because Jackass 3D, believe it or not, had the record for a non-narrative movie opening before the Eras Tour. $50.3 million for Jackass 3D. That number has now almost been doubled. The openings of Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus, the Best of Both Worlds concert, and Justin Bieber, Never Say Never, are in 3rd and 4th place. And then Jackass number 2 comes in 5th place at just over $29 million. I should note that I did not include, for purposes of this chart, sort of hybrid movies, which would be Jackass Presents Bad Grandpa or Borat, because while a lot of that is, yes, documentary, there's also a scripted element, and I wanted to go for pure non-narrative, non-scripted filmmaking. For me, one of the remarkable things about the Eras Tour wasn't just that a lot of people came out to see it, it's who the movie brought out to movie theaters. So let's look at the demographics first on their own. These were the people that were out this past weekend seeing the Eras Tour. The audience was 82% women. That is the heaviest skew towards women that I can actually think of. We'll look at it compared to Barbie in just a couple of minutes. When you look at the age demographics, it was actually almost evenly spread between the ages of 13 to 34. Audiences 35 plus constituted only 5% of the movie-going audience. So who was going to see the Taylor Swift movie this past weekend? Well, to an extremely large degree, we're talking about women 34 years old and under. And let's stack that up against the movie that still holds the October record for the highest box office opening, which is Joker. And you can see the difference in turnout. 82% women came to see the Eras Tour versus 36% for Joker. And then look at the age split. 63% of the Eras Tour audience was under 25 versus 37% for Joker. And those demographics are actually literally mirrored. 37% of the Eras Tour demographics were over 25 versus 63% for Joker. So yes, the Eras Tour audience was predominantly younger women. The Joker audience was primarily men over 25. That's really not that much of a shocker, but it just goes to show you that you can turn out in nearly equal numbers completely different audiences if you program to their interests. And the Taylor Swift audience was even younger and skewed even more towards women than Barbie. These are the demographics for Barbie versus the Eras Tour. The Barbie audience was 71% women. That's 11% lower than the audience for the Eras Tour, which was 82% women. And then the audience for the Eras Tour was even younger than Barbie's audience. 56% of Barbie's audience was under 25 versus 63% for the Eras Tour. And then when you look at the over 25 crowd, 37% for the Eras Tour, 44% for Barbie. So yes, even more so than Barbie. Taylor Swift was able to bring younger women out to the theater, and this is not a demographic that is super served. Really, the Joker demographic is much more super served. The idea of the big comic book or blockbuster film that's largely fueled by males 18 or 25 plus. There are so many movies that hit that demographic that have been failing in recent years and recent months. And here we see with Barbie, and even more so with the Eras Tour, that if you make programming that appeals to women and younger women, they will show up at the movie theater. Now, of course, I'm sure the response to this is just going to be pumping out many more concert films until the audience stops showing up for them. But there's one real lesson here, and it's the same one that I think that the studios and the exhibitors should have learned from Barbie. And that is that if you want to succeed, if you want to boost the audience attendance, then you can't just super serve the same audience anymore, because that audience has grown tired of the kind of movies that would draw them out in numbers. You have to diversify your programming, expand the net, make things that appeal to different groups of people. It helped to save the summer box office with Barbie, along with Oppenheimer, a movie that, by the way, skewed older than the average demographic. It has now helped to save the fall box office with the Eras Tour. Maybe, just maybe, there will be some actual productive lessons learned here, but I'm not going to hold my breath. There were a few other movies in the top 10 that hit some box office milestones that I want to go over real quick. The first is Saw X. It has now bypassed 2017's Jigsaw to become the 7th highest Saw film of all time. It doesn't look like it's going to have that momentum to coast into perhaps not even the top 5 as far as Saw movies. It's got Saw 3D in its sights right now, but because of its low cost of production, it's still going to be deemed, I think, worth it by the studio. And then when you look at the franchise tracker adjusted for inflation, you see that Saw X hasn't quite passed 2017's Jigsaw just yet. It's still the 8th highest grossing Saw film, factoring inflation into the picture. Also looking at the Conjuring universe, The Nun 2 has passed the $250 million mark worldwide, and it is now the 5th highest grossing film in the Conjuring universe worldwide. I think that's probably where it's going to stay. It has passed Annabelle Comes Home, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, and The Curse of La Llorona. I don't think it's going to get to that $305 million mark in order to pass Annabelle Creation, but again, that low cost of production is still going to, I think, ensure that we will continue to see Nun films and Conjuring films in theaters for a long time to come. We've got a lot more to break down about the box office this weekend, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this week's show. This video is brought to you by Babbel. If you look at trending searches over time, you'll see that interest in learning a new language is only growing as the years go by. And if you look at seasonal data, interest often spikes in the fall because summer's over, it's getting dark earlier, and it's the perfect time to pick up a new skill, like learning a new language. With Babbel, you can start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks, just in time to impress your relatives for the holidays. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are designed by over 150 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks, and Babbel is designed by real people for real conversations. The lessons I've done on Babbel are easy to understand as you progress naturally. Plus, when you get an answer right, you hear this. Trust me, you'll learn to love that sound. With over 10 million subscriptions sold, Babbel is real language learning for real conversations, and their advanced speech recognition is like having your own personal language coach to help improve your pronunciation to get you prepped and confident for real-world conversations. With Babbel, you can learn everything you need from vocabulary words to culture, and all it takes is 10 minutes a day. Here's a special limited time deal for our viewers and listeners to get you started right now. Get 55% off your Babbel subscription, but only for people that watch and listen to the show at babbel.com/Dan. Get 55% off at babbel.com/Dan, spelled BABBEL.com/Dan. Rules and restrictions may apply. Let's look now at the per theater average for the movies at the box office this past weekend, and it was actually a pretty close competition between the Eras Tour and another movie. The Eras Tour actually ended up winning the per theater average race with $24,074 per theater in each of its 3,855 theaters, so it may have been a chaotic weekend for theater owners, but it was also a lucrative weekend for those owners. Almost taking number one, though, was Anatomy of a Fall, which was only playing in 5 theaters, but made $23,569 in each of those 5 theaters. There was some overlap, by the way. A couple theaters in LA, I know at least one theater in New York. If you were one of those theaters, then you had a really big weekend because you were making the same amount of money from the Taylor Swift movie and then Anatomy of a Fall. If you don't know what Anatomy of a Fall is, it won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, which is basically the Best Picture winner at the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year. And for indie fans, when the Palme d'Or winner drops in theaters, it is kind of like the Eras Tour for indie movie fans. It is like the event of the year, and so I think that's why a lot of people went out to see it, because the buzz around this movie is very strong. In third place was Once Within a Time, which is actually a 51-minute experimental film about the end of the world. It's co-directed and written by Godfrey Reggio, who also did the Qatsi trilogy of films beginning back in 1982. He re-teamed with composer Philip Glass for this movie as well. Once Within a Time made $12,250 in just one theater. Dix the Musical continues to do well on a per theater basis. It's now in 15 theaters and made $6,312 per theater. And in fifth place is Divinity, which played in just one theater and brought in $5,113. This movie's produced by Steven Soderbergh. It stars Bella Thorne, Scott Bakula, and Stephen Dorff. Also somewhat experimental. It's a sci-fi film about unlocking the secret of immortality from writer-director Eddie Alcazar. These were the top films in limited release, so these are movies playing in 1,000 theaters or fewer. Another concert film is also having its own great run in limited release. The 40th anniversary of the Talking Heads concert film Stop Making Sense stays at the top of the charts. It made another $171,000 in its fourth week of release, playing in 258 theaters. The music-related documentary Joan Baez, I Am a Noise, playing in 114 theaters, made $153,000. Then we had The Royal Hotel, which is carried over from last week, playing in 273 theaters, making $134,000. Anatomy of a Fall in 5 theaters is able to total $117,000. And then Dix the Musical in its second week brings in $94,677. Of course, these limited release films are often found in the various independent theaters that are scattered around the country and around the world. And what I like to do here on the show most weeks is to highlight a specific independent theater because they need help, they need support, and they deserve the spotlight because a lot of these folks that work at these theaters aren't doing it for the money. They're not doing it because they're working for a big chain. They're doing it for the love of movies. They're going out there, they're booking these smaller films, they're trying to get them exposure. And so these theaters deserve a little bit of exposure. And this week I actually get to speak from experience because this is a theater that I visited just last week. I took a drive a few hours out of town to Tulsa, Oklahoma in order to see a screening of Killers of the Flower Moon. I'll have my review for that later this week here on the channel. And that screening was held at a really nice indie theater called the Circle Cinema in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It is the only nonprofit movie theater operating in Tulsa and the oldest movie theater in the city, with a mission to offer a diverse array of programming aimed at celebrating and fostering a sense of community. The Circle Cinema opened in July of 1928. It went through a refurbishment in the 60s. There was a stint as an adult theater in the 70s, and then the theater was closed in the mid-1990s. But in December 2002, the Circle Cinema was reborn as a nonprofit organization and reopened in 2004. A refurbishment that concluded back in 2014 included the reinstallation of the theater's original pipe organ, and the building is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The Circle hosts film screenings, community events, festivals, special presentations of silent films and classic movies, filmmaker appearances, and more. You can also see the Circle in the opening minutes of 1983's The Outsiders. Right now you can catch The Royal Hotel, Dumb Money, Stop Making Sense, A Haunting in Venice, Pedro Almodovar's Strange Way of Life, and the documentary Bad Press. This weekend, you can also catch Killers of the Flower Moon and the Eras Tour, as well as Dix the Musical, a lot of movies that we've talked about here on this show. I really just dug the atmosphere of the Circle Cinema. They also have a gallery, and they were setting up for a community event while I was there. It really did feel like a small town theater that actually did care about keeping the world of cinema alive. The staff that I spoke to there was very friendly, and it was just a very nice theater. I enjoyed my time there. You can find out more, including showtimes, how to buy tickets, and how to donate, because they are a 501c3 organization, at circlecinema.org. And just as a reminder, 10% of the ad revenue from this video will go to Circle Cinema. Anytime I feature a theater on this show, then 10% of the ad rev goes to that theater if they take donations. And if you do end up going to the Circle Cinema, tell them, as always, that Dan sent you. All right, let's take a bigger picture look at some seasonal and yearly charts, and we will start first with the 2023 fall holiday box office. This is everything post-Labor Day to the end of the year, and we have a new champion, Taylor Swift The Eras Tour, now the highest grossing domestic film of the fall at $92.8 million. That bumps The Nun 2 down to second place at $83.7 million, and Paw Patrol The Mighty Movie down to third place at $49.7 million. The Exorcist Believer climbs up 2 spots from last week at $44.9 million. Saw X drops 1 spot to number 5. A Haunting in Venice drops down 3 spots to number 6. The Creator stays at number 7. My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3 also drops 3 spots to number 8. Expendables 4 drops to number 9. Javon drops to number 10. And Dumb Money drops out of the fall holiday box office altogether. There's no change to the 2023 domestic box office. If the Eras Tour is able to, let's say, double its opening, then it would hit this chart. But the question is, how front-loaded is this movie? It was very front-loaded as far as pre-sales. Weekend 2, I think, will give us a good idea of just how much money it could make in the final box office total. Barbie, of course, is number 1. It's now at over $635 million, followed by the Super Mario Brothers movie, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Oppenheimer is approaching $325 million domestically. The Little Mermaid is number 6. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is at number 7. John Wick Chapter 4 is at number 8. Sound of Freedom is at number 9. And Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny is at number 10. No changes in the international box office this week, so let's look at the 2023 worldwide box office, which also hasn't changed. Barbie's at $1.439 billion, followed by the Super Mario Brothers movie and its $1.362 billion gross. Oppenheimer's in third place. It's now at $942 million, followed by Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Fast X at $713.9 million, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, China's Full River Red and The Wandering Earth 2, 2023's The Little Mermaid, and Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. Before we wrap up, as always, I love to take a look at a weekend in box office history, and we are going back 30 years to the 41st weekend of the year, October 8th through the 10th, 1993, which saw the opening of the Sylvester Stallone, Wesley Snipes action extravaganza Demolition Man at $14.2 million on its way to a $58 million domestic total. Disney's Cool Runnings actually added 20% in business in its second week because it had a big theatrical expansion in week 2 at $8.5 million for a total of $17 million. Malice was in third place in its second weekend, an 18.4% drop and a $7.5 million weekend 2 total. Malice was co-written by Aaron Sorkin and stars Alec Baldwin as a shady doctor who operates on Nicole Kidman and how this affects her life with her husband, Bill Pullman. A $46 million total for Malice when all the receipts were added up. In fourth place was the movie that I couldn't understand why I wasn't allowed to see because it starred Macaulay Culkin, but was rated R because he swore and was an evil kid. It was called The Good Son. It dropped 34.1% in its third weekend for a $5.1 million total. Its final box office tally was at $44.7 million. And in fifth place, another film from Martin Scorsese, The Age of Innocence. In its fourth week, dropped 18.1% for a $3.4 million total. The final domestic total on The Age of Innocence was $32.2 million. Of course, here on the show, we don't just leave those dollars sitting out there unadjusted. We like to adjust for inflation and get a better sense of what it would look like in today's money. And when we hit that inflation button, we can see that Demolition Man opened to an adjusted total of $30.3 million on its way to a domestic adjusted total of $123.6 million. Cool Runnings was at $18.1 million adjusted with a final domestic total of almost $150 million. That was a big hit movie back in 1993. Malice was in third place with $16 million adjusted and a final domestic total of right around $100 million, $98.8 million. The Good Son also made close to $100 million domestic, $95 million. Its third weekend total was $10.9 million adjusted. And then The Age of Innocence in fifth place at $7.2 million and a final adjusted domestic total of $68.7 million. And this upcoming weekend does see the opening of another film from Martin Scorsese, his latest, Killers of the Flower Moon, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Lily Gladstone, and Robert De Niro. It's a movie that I look forward to talking about with you here on the channel. I'm going to try to get that review up, I think probably tomorrow, because I want people to have a chance to see it before it hits theaters this Friday. And just to sort of set the stage for next week's Charts with Dan, let's look at the top 5 openings for Martin Scorsese, not adjusted for inflation. And unless Killers of the Flower Moon really misses its projections, then we should be looking at perhaps the second or third highest opening in Martin Scorsese's career domestically. Shutter Island right now is his highest opening film at just over $41 million, followed by The Departed at $26.8 million and The Wolf of Wall Street at $18.4 million. Those all star Leonardo DiCaprio. It should be noted that The Wolf of Wall Street actually opened on a Wednesday, so that opening weekend total does not include the first 2 days gross. That's the same case with Hugo, which also opened on a Wednesday. Its opening weekend, Friday through Sunday, was was $11.3 million. And then in fifth place, we have 1991's Cape Fear, starring Robert De Niro, with $10.2 million. So we will dive even further into Martin Scorsese's filmography next week here on the show. We'll talk about Killers of the Flower Moon, the second weekend of the Eras Tour. There is a lot to cover as we get to the middle of October and into the heart of the fall movie season, although so many of those movies were pulled out of the heart. Thank you so much for spending part of your day here with me. Be sure to check out the description below to learn more about the Circle Cinema and about the sponsor for this week's video, Babbel. And of course, come right back here to the channel for more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.